Padre Thomas Pieters. I like to remember my uncle, Padre Thomas Pieters, who was interested in the Nordic history since the late 50s and early 60s of the 20th century. He states that the Vikings were in Brazil and came ashore on the coast of what's now Rio de Janeiro and the nearby city of Cabo Frio. From there on, they went upriver until they reached the big waterfalls of what's now the Foz de Iguaçu. Padre Tomás went to Brazil in 1958. The first years he worked in the southern state of Santa Catarina and lived in the small community of Matos Costa, and later the city of Caçador, where he founded a little museum packed with artifacts, arrowheads, spearheads, and other hand-worked tools used by non-Indians. There he found his Viking stones, as he termed them. Those stones he gathered on an arm of the Iguaçu River. The figures on these stones have resemblance with the stones in the Bolivian Temple of Sun. Padre Alfredo Roch, at that time director of the National Institute of Archaeological Research in Brazil, writes about these stones that they were authentic and probably made by Indians who learned from white people who had contacts with Indians. Well, this last thesis I do not agree with, because most Indians didn't make drawings or sculptures of themselves, for they would have no peace in a further life. Padre Tomás also informed me that at all times it was possible to descend the rivers till the place where he found these stones. These stones have remarkable features, demonstrating faces of Nordic man and images figuring the sun god and the moon goddess. He told me that in the fishing town of Itacoatiara, which means painted stone, some further up along the banks of the San Francisco River exists a rock of 50-meter altitude. On top of that rock are rune signs and also the name of Ulf, the Viking god of hunting, and measurement points indicated by arrows and an image of a dragon ship. Padre Tomás, he said to me, he told me, back then the water level of the river must have been much higher and formed at some place as a kind of inland sea. Without doubt that the Normans docked their ships there and put inscriptions and symbols to mark their presence. Then there's the thesis of the Gavia Rock in Rio de Janeiro, where, viewed from the sea, will be read and understandable in enormous runes. Translated, oak can be found at the beach of large gravel stone, because this for the worn out ships used this wood for repairs and other purposes. But there are a lot of contradictions concerning this. In another interview, he states, Padre Tomás, this is not only important to the general world history, but also to the church history, because I can prove that 500 years before Columbus, already monks were preaching, and we have all information on that subject by letters which were written then in 1500. That the indigenous people already had the knowledge of a white man with a long beard, robe, and holding a cross in his hands and poured water over the heads of people. How is that possible? And all those Bible stories about the flood Adam and Eve, and they must be saved by man, you can find back in the myths of the Indian people of South America. This is absolute evidence that before Columbus, already other people were here. Irish monks were said to come back, and so the Indian people were waiting for the return of the white man, which name was Kontiki, who even became their god, and his wife, the moon goddess. Therefore, when the Spaniards and Portuguese went ashore, they were welcomed with kindness. And the Spaniards and Portuguese, they made a booze of it in a dreadful manner. So were the words of Padre Thomas. And once he showed me a 16th century map by a cartographer named Vossius, which clearly indicates Brazil as Costa Dania, the coast of the Danes, where the Vikings arrived. For Thomas Pieters, there was no hesitation that the Vikings were in Brazil.